Hello there, and welcome to another Wisdom Wednesday episode of the Alter Your Health podcast. I am Dr. Ben.
And I'm Dr. Susanna.
And we are both naturopathic doctors who empower you to heal yourself through whole food, plant-based nutrition, lifestyle medicine, and mindset empowerment. And that's really the nature of our conversation today on Wisdom Wednesday, where we're talking about our insights from head to toe. Medicinal Monday is, of course, talking about altering your health, the physiology from head to toe, optimizing our nutrition and lifestyle to address everything in our bodies. Wisdom Wednesday, we're sharing the insights in more of the from more of the energetic, spiritual, holistic perspective, if those words are okay with you. They probably are. If they're not, you probably wouldn't be listening to this. So yeah, we're excited to talk about, I guess the topic today is the brain mind connection. How about that? It's like, what? I thought the brain was the mind. Well, maybe we should first things first sort things out. Susanna, what is the brain?
Yes. Well, the way that we talk about brain versus mind is that the brain is like the organ. It's the computing organ. It essentially is, that cluster of neurons that's, processing
Between
all of those
in the skull,
in the
between
skull.
the ears.
Yes. So that's the brain. It's located in the body. It's a physical organ.
Well, I don't think
the
you
mind-
said this is our perspective. I don't know if anyone, I don't know. I've never heard anyone say that our mind is located between our ears and the skull.
No, I think that people certainly argue that the mind is like a component of the brain, that the mind is in the brain, that the mind comes from the brain.
I guess I've never really heard that perspective, to be honest. I mean, I feel like I know that it exists, but I've never really heard that perspective shared.
I think it's also implied when people do say mind-body connection.
I think that mind-body connection, I mean, for those who don't know, we generally say brain-body connection when talking about the psycho-neuro-endoimmunology
connection.
Like the connections that literally do exist between brain and body. But of course, we're talking about like the mind-body and mind-brain connections, which exist between our emotional, energetic being and our physiology.
So if the brain is the organ, then what is the mind?
The mind is the force from which all life comes. The creative force from, I don't know if you want to force or source. I guess they rhyme. The source of life, the source from which all life and inspiration and wisdom and creativity comes. And we like to talk about the mind as that component that brings, or that we connect with, that brings insights, that brings deeper understanding, realization in kind of the emotional, intuitive world, but also that same force. I guess I'm struggling to find a better word. That same intelligence that guides our cells, that guides our physiology to rest in balance and seek balance and operate properly given the surroundings and environment at any point in time.
Right. So, one could say we not only have mind in the brain, but we have mind in every single cell, in every single organ of the body. Mind is present in all of nature, in animals, in plants, that innate intelligence that brings forth life and health is in all living things.
And I'm thinking about the writings of, I know Dr. Larry Dossey writes about the non-local mind. He talks about mind being non-local, not something that you can fit in anything or find in any one thing, but mind is like this thing that, and he of course has like documented data and science that supports this idea that mind is this source that all of humanity and all of nature can kind of tap into and plug into, or I guess one could also say that we are plugged into it so we can realize our interconnectedness with mind. So yeah, that's just, I guess, starting with some semantics between brain.
And maybe that's a new way of thinking about mind for some of our listeners.
Brain and mind. So, but yeah, in Medicinal Monday, we're talking about cognitive health, of course, preventing age-related cognitive decline, dementia, Alzheimer's, etc., as well as addressing stroke, which is very much a common thing in our society, and also just kind of the more acute, fleeting, transient symptom of brain fog, which also affects many people.
Or chronic.
Yeah, no, it can
Chronic
be
brain fog.
acute or chronically recurrent. But in any case, yeah, on Medicinal Monday, we address more of the nutritional, lifestyle, physiologic factors that are playing into these symptoms or conditions. And today we're exploring the emotional, energetic connections between our beingness and the symptoms of cognitive decline and Alzheimer's that are, again, so common, sadly. But I think that the insights and references that you found, Dr. Susanna, they really resonate with me.
Yes, but actually, before we get to the energetic piece, I do just kind of want to talk a little bit more about the physiological link between stress and these cognitive issues. Because, in many of our Wisdom Wednesday episodes, we're still talking about that brain-body connection. And in this sense, it's like the brain-brain connection. How does physiological stress actually impair our brain health? And we can look at the examples of brain fog and stroke. And let's start with brain fog, where we talked on Monday, or I guess it was Tuesday, we talked about how brain fog is generally a result of inflammation, neuroinflammation. It could be a result from systemic inflammation that's also affecting the brain. And that inflammation generally comes from an imbalance in the immune system or imbalanced digestive function. But if we think about what long-term stress does to our body, it also sets us up for states of chronic inflammation as well.
Well, I'm thinking about also there's a lot of research that's been done around stress and cognitive performance. And the way that they conduct this research oftentimes is that they have students, the college students, and they rob them of a night's sleep, and then they give them a mentally stimulating task, like performing some test or doing something that involves their mental activity. And it's very predictable and reliable that when we lose a night's sleep, we don't have the mental performance. And we've all had that experience. And we always like to just suggest that losing a night's sleep is really an acute physiologic stress. Now, a lot of people introduce all different types of acute physiologic stress, whether it's nutritional stressors or toxicity stressors or thought stressors that they're, thinking about the news or current events or relationships or finances or, all that chronic stressful thinking that creates that physiologic stress that literally impedes proper cognition and the ability to perform and think clearly and have creativity and insights, which I guess as I'm, rambling on here, it's like we always say in the conversation around like mind, thought, and consciousness, how when we're thinking a lot, when we're caught up in our thought storms, we lose that feeling of connection to creativity, to the innate creativity and wisdom and answers that we're seeking.
Yeah, the clarity of mind, right?
So the clarity of mind kind of fades, I guess, in kind of the mind universal wisdom perspective, but the clarity also fades in the physiologic neurochemistry, neurophysiologic processes of like computing that take place in the brain as well.
Yeah. But then if we look at the examples of stroke and also Alzheimer's, we talked about how vascular health is so important for preventing Alzheimer's disease. And of course, we know that it's so important for preventing stroke, right? Because stroke is really a cardiovascular issue. But if we look at the science around stress and cardiovascular health, there is a huge body of evidence showing the effects of stress on the cardiovascular system, how it can increase our blood pressure, it can also increase our blood glucose levels.
Of
And
course.
both of those things are going to set ourselves up for more, risk of having those adverse cardiac events, which could be stroke, but can also set us up for the progression of atherosclerosis, the plaquing of the arteries, which leads to both stroke and also Alzheimer's.
So what you're referring to are really just the basic scientific linkages between our brain and our brain. Our what happens, because of course, like, just kind of drawing these connections more definitively when we're in that state of physiologic stress. Cortisol levels raise, our adrenaline levels raise, and that mobilizes blood sugar to, of course, get us moving so that we can escape from any sort of acute danger that we might be in.
And blood pressure.
So blood pressure, heart rate, blood sugar, all of these things are elevated so that we can literally mobilize the resources to survive. And of course, the consequence of that chronically elevated blood pressure, chronically elevated blood sugar, chronically strained heart are the cardiovascular implications, as well as, from the metabolic perspective, which is really important with regard to Alzheimer's. We talked about Alzheimer's being kind of like referred to as type 3 diabetes. There's that big insulin resistance component. So if we're secreting, breaking down and releasing a lot of blood sugar, like just when we're thinking and not when we're after eating, then that's going to affect our metabolic health and our cognition.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about this linkage between the stress and brain health, because the stress starts in the brain with stressful thinking, which then translates to physiological stress in our cardiovascular system, but then that then impacts the health of the brain cells, the brain matter.
So that's a circular feedback loop.
Yes.
Cool. So those are the physiologic brain connections that how our physiologic stress really does impact our neurophysiologic functioning and cognition in both the acute and longer term sense. Now shifting gears to talk about the mind brain, more of the mind brain connection. Like I was saying, I found the references and resources that you came across pretty resonant, and sometimes you just kind of hear something and it's like, yeah, that's right on. So the themes around, I guess they're mostly around the chronic symptoms of age-related cognitive decline, Alzheimer's, dementia, etc. It's this theme of like escaping the world, or having trouble kind of dealing with the world, which
refusing to accept the world at the current state that it's in.
Yeah.
I'll just read some of these because they might resonate with some listeners. Refusal to deal with the world as it is. In another resource, we have loss of power, inability to deal with life, overwhelmed by life, wanting to run away to another time, not wanting to remember or be present.
Yeah. So not, that really resonates, because I feel like a lot of people on planet Earth, like a lot of people who aren't advanced age, who don't have cognitive issues or dementia, have kind of this acute expression or manifestation of this disability or lack of willingness to accept the present state of affairs. I know that, like, and then we cope with it in different ways. I know that for me and for a lot of people, I like, it's like just kind of tuning out with a TV show or scrolling the internet or social media, kind of just like, taking my thoughts off of all the things that I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around and accepting, and just shoving all my mental energy into a screen or social media or something like that. And that's becoming, I think, more so as we progress into our technological age, just so much more of a commonly accepted way of quote unquote dealing with life or coping with things, which, yeah, of course, there's nothing wrong or bad with it, but it gets me thinking about this continual dysfunctional relationship to some degree. It's not really, how much is it serving me? And can I consider I'm just sharing my personal stuff. Can I consider being more present in the real world, in life? And I think that really can be the medicine or the antidote, not
Antidote.
antidote to the age-related cognitive decline and dementia, just presence, which, I think if I trust most of us have been with people with cognitive issues who've been losing their mind with age. And it is interesting to see that theme of, it's like, I kind of just feel it. I like these people, as sad as it is, just have a hard time dealing with stuff. And it's like their soul, is just zoning out, tuning out. Or I don't know, if not their soul is there, but their ego is tuning out. Their ego is tuning out and having a hard time being present.
Yeah, and well,
Anyhow.
I think it is a very interesting potential or probable cause, energetic cause for age-related cognitive decline. And I think it could honestly also apply to brain fog, because loss of memory or loss of clarity is like the ultimate distraction from what's happening around us, right?
Good point.
And what's really interesting, what came to mind when you were talking, Ben, is how, there is this kind of societal habit to try to distract ourselves, with a TV show or this or that or whatever. And all of those distractions really do disengage us from life. And we were talking on Monday or Tuesday, really, about how one of the ways we can actually support our cognitive function is to interact with the world, engage with the world.
And we also like the learning new things. And the disengagement is like we're turning off. It's like we're really turning off a big part of the brain that is designed to take things in and learn things new and create new tasks.
Right.
So I think that it really is the antidote is being engaged. And of course, I think, without going too far on the tangent, but I think our culture, it's just so sad that oftentimes we've got this relationship with the elderly, like, okay, they're old, they retired, they're old, they like just put them over there. And it's like, there's not the cultural engagement. It's not set up, at least in our culture. A lot of other cultures, Latin American cultures and Asian cultures, there's more, my understanding is there's more reverence and connection and engagement with elderly population. And our culture kind of manifests and perpetuates this disengagement, which is really sad, which of course we don't have to do with our family, with our community, right? So it's just definitely something to consider.
Yeah. But going back to what you were saying about how like presence is the antidote, really, I mean, I would say both presence and also acceptance are the antidote to this probable cause of, refusing to deal with the world as it is or not accepting the world as it is. I mean, that's kind of what I want to talk about, because I think we can all relate to feeling like anger or frustration or just this non-acceptance of stuff that happens, right? I mean, we're all human, so we all experience that. And different people experience it in response to different things, of course. But, we can always look around us and, blame something for our upset or our anger or whatever.
Hmm.
But, in these Wisdom Wednesday episodes, we always like to remind people that the human experience, our emotional responses are not dependent on what's actually happening in the world, that they are a result of our quality of thinking in response to what's happening in the world. So our experience comes from our thinking about something. And when we think about, okay, like, well, how could I become more accepting of what is? I think, to me, it comes back to trust,
Hmm.
and trusting source, and trusting universal mind, back to
Yeah.
that word, and trusting that what is happening is ultimately, well, first of all, much of what's happening in the world is beyond our control, but also that there is this kind of greater force behind everything that is ultimately for,
Yeah.
a higher good.
In other words, what you're saying leads me to share that, I guess a practice or a perspective that I often seek to gain is like seeing a situation through God's eyes, right? Through some real elevated perspective, which, might sound unreasonable or unrealistic. Like, how could I gain perspective in this moment? But at least, like, getting curious about, okay, my perception right now is very limited. At least acknowledging that what I see is very limited. There's a lot more to be seen in this difficult situation. How can I start to see things from this angle or that angle? Or maybe like the ultimate angle where it's all, like you were saying, unfolding as it is. And there's some magic and mysticism to the unfoldment of what's happening within us and around us.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, before we address these questions, because I know you were going there, but I just want to say, like, that really resonates with me, Ben, because I have been thinking more and more about how our individual perceptions are largely based off of what information we have access to. And we might not know the full picture. We might just hear something and then form our judgments based off of what we hear. But do we actually know what is happening? Do we know the full story? Can we ever know the full story?
totally.
And just opening our mind to, like, essentially opening our mind to considering, like, maybe what I think isn't necessarily the complete truth.
Yeah.
I think can often kind of help bring about that, that curiosity
Totally.
and that feeling of acceptance.
100%. So yeah, I am wanting to kind of wrap up our conversation this episode, but I do think that the couple of questions that came in from YouTube chatters are relevant. And I guess the first one about meditation to manage stress, of course, we kind of talk around this often in these conversations. But, the stress is put simply, stress is not a meditation deficiency, right? The cause of stress is not a lack of meditation. The cause of stress, like you said, and like is often said, is taking stressful thoughts seriously. Like, we all have stressful thoughts. We all do. That's just the nature of the human experience, is having all spectrum flavors of thoughts and the corresponding emotional experiences that go with it. And the issue that humans tend to slip into, all of us, is that we get stuck and latch on to these thoughts, latch on to these emotions, rather than allow the fluidity and flow through us. So, put another way, there's nothing wrong with stressful thinking. Nothing wrong with stressful thinking. Where we start to kind of, experience a little trouble is when we create our narrative around this and allow these stressful thoughts to overwhelm us. And I guess I'm fumbling for the words here, but allow these stressful thoughts to consume us and blind us from the ultimate reality, which is they are just thoughts. They are just moving on through. And behind the stressful thought is always a new thought. It's going to have a different quality to it, and we can have curiosity and open-mindedness to experience that, to witness that, and rather than be totally immersed in and engaged with and consumed by the stressful thought. So meditation, one might say, is a practice of observing thoughts and having and developing that experiential relationship with thoughts as being separate from us. Now, again, I personally know that that meditation is not a necessity for mental health and clarity and stress management. Like Sam suggested, I've had a meditation practice, and I kind of like, it's I don't need it. I don't need it. I don't believe anyone needs it. That's not to say meditation is wrong or bad, of course. But what about trauma? Trauma, big or small, affecting cognitive clarity. How might trauma affect cognitive clarity? I think this ties in pretty nicely because, of course, trauma, like our experience of trauma, is really just the traumatic thoughts that we're thinking, right? So trauma happens, that thinking, and therefore reliving. So trauma happens, right? And of course, that's not to say that trauma is not a thing. That's not to say that trauma is just we should just brush it off and just move on or anything like that. Even though I think maybe it is kind of healthy to just consider moving on, consider being in the present moment where probably there's no traumatic event existing. For listeners out there, is there any trauma happening in your life right now? No. Okay. Well, then maybe you don't need to bring it in to your life by replaying and revisiting the traumatic thoughts and experiences that you've had in the past. And, I think that there is something to kind of move through and work through and integrate and relate with that experience in a healthy and constructive sort of way. But in a sense, back to the stuff in the book here, reliving our trauma is like not being present in life, right? It's not being engaged and present in life. If we're engaged and present in trauma, we can't be engaged with and present in two things at once. We can't multitask our consciousness, So it's like we're either in our traumatic thinking or we're present in life where we have access to clear thinking and creativity. So hopefully that kind of speaks to your question, like how can trauma affect cognitive clarity? So if we're in traumatic thinking, then we're not in clear thinking. That's just the way that I see it. Is there anything to add?
I mean, just to bring a little bit more physiology into it, if we're circulating in traumatic thoughts, if we're circulating in anxious thoughts, if we're circulating in depressed, sad thoughts, doesn't matter what the flavor of the thoughts are. If we are circulating in those thoughts and really buying into those thoughts, believing them to be true or giving them a lot of value, that's then going to translate into that physiological stress in the body, which, as we talked about in the beginning of this episode, has its effects on the actual health of our brain cells and brain matter and brain functioning.
Cool.
And
yeah, totally. There's that brain connection again.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Well, very awesome conversation. Brain mind connection stuff. Thanks for bringing the good questions to our YouTubers. And we look forward to seeing you guys next week as we go to the next thing.
I know. We need to choose what the next thing is. So
the next thing.
We'll surprise you next week.
See you at Medicinal Monday.
Bye for now.